Well, let's start with the prologue, which is when we play as the real Wukong, right? Which is him after Journey to the West, where we end up facing Shen for the first time. And we also encounter the entire Celestial Army, which is probably commanded by the Jade Emperor. Well, Wukong's story up to that point, in short, is that he was born from the mythical stone, ends up becoming the king of the monkeys, but then goes in search of immortality because he can't handle the idea that at some point he's going to lose all the luxurious and party-filled life he has. He ends up being trained by an immortal, learns the 72 transformations, then goes to the bottom of the ocean, steals the weapon from the dragon god, which in this case is the real staff. With the Jingu Bang, he also ends up getting a magical armor and some shoes that allow him to walk on clouds. But the dragon god ends up contacting the Jade Emperor, telling him everything that happened. And at that moment, the Jade Emperor sends a messenger to talk to Wukong. So the gods end up taking Wukong to heaven to try to control him. But the position he got in heaven was to take care of the horses. He didn't like it very much and ended up leaving the place where he was supposed to stay. And then he started wandering around heaven, eating the peaches of youth, the pills of immortality, and he had also erased his name from the Book of the Dead. Anyway, he did a lot of things and became effectively immortal and ended up coming down from heaven again and proclaimed himself the great sage equal to heaven. So the divine beings became very angry with Wukong and decided to deal with him more directly, sending Erlang Shen. Erlang Shen manages to handle Wukong and takes him to heaven, where Wukong is imprisoned. Despite this hellish fate, he escapes and resumes causing trouble for the gods. They call Buddha, and Buddha traps him under a mountain until he is rescued by Tang San and joins several other characters. And, at the end of the story, he ends up achieving enlightenment. Well, this is the Wukong we're playing as at this exact moment in the game, but now let's talk about the boss of this prologue, who is Erlang Shen. Well, Erlang Shen is simply the most powerful warrior god in the heavens, and he is the nephew of the Jade Emperor, who, in the case of Chinese mythology, at least in what we're dealing with here, from Journey to the West, which is the story the game is based on, the Jade Emperor is the supreme god, so to speak. Well, Erlang Shen has the heavenly eye, which is the third eye he has here on his forehead, and it's capable of seeing absolute truth and destroying demons instantly. As soon as he looks at a demon, that demon disappears. And he also has the 72 transformations. He also knows how to transform himself, and we'll see that here in the video a bit later. He's also accompanied by Xiao Tianwan, which is his dog. The relationship between Erlang Shen and Wukong is one of complete rivalry, okay? And as we see in this prologue, right, when Erlang Shen says that this monkey is not just any monkey, right, the monkey who became a Buddha, and you can say that in Journey to the West as well. Aside from Buddha himself, of course, Erlang Shen was the main rival. There, with Sun Wukong, he was the one who showed up and managed to fight him as an equal, because until then, he was dominating. He was beating up everyone, and even Wukong tries to run away from him at a certain point, which is when they're both giants fighting. And all of Wukong's soldiers end up getting scared and run away. And Wukong, thinking he had been abandoned, runs away too and tries to disguise himself, to transform into all kinds of things. But Erlang Shen's eye, as I told you, sees the truth, and Wukong couldn't hide from that eye and ended up getting caught. But even though they are rivals and all that, as the story goes on, the two start to respect each other as well, and they also realize that they actually have quite a lot in common. Both are very proud, and in a way they don't get along very well with the bureaucracy of heaven. Instead, you can do really well by leaving a like on the video, subscribing to the channel, and especially considering becoming a member here. For less than 8 rays, it won't even hurt you, and you'll help me a lot to keep up the work here. You'll get early access to the videos, sometimes even a week before other people, and you'll also have access to exclusive videos. Your name will appear on the screen and be immortalized, just like these people. You can also support me by purchasing the products shown here, like books, Journey to the West, or PlayStation 5. Just click on the product or use the link in the pinned comment. Thanks. Well, in Chapter 1, we start the journey with the Destined One, trying to get Wukong's relics, and in doing so, we end up passing through some well-known places from Journey to the West, like the Wolf Forest and the Black Wind Cave. In this chapter, we have 2 main final bosses. The first one, which is required to continue the story, is the Black Wind Bear Demon, who can also be called the Great Black King or the Black Wind King. And in Journey to the West, he is one of the first enemies that Wukong, Tang Sanzang, and his group end up facing. He is described as having an imposing appearance. He wears a black bronze armor, a black silk robe, and also carries a spear with black edges. Well, the story of this demon with Wukong goes like this. He was just walking around when suddenly he sees a huge fire happening at the Guanguanin monastery. He heads over there at first with the intention of helping put out the fire, but when he gets there, he sees something that really catches his attention. A golden robe. He ends up feeling attracted to this robe, takes it, and brings it back to his cave. He even starts planning a dinner, to invite his friends so they could see the robe and feel jealous of him. But Wukong goes after this robe that belonged to Tang Sanzang. When they get there, they start fighting, and it's an even match, okay? The bear manages to hold back the Monkey King, but then he retreats to the safety of his cave. And then Wukong, realizing that maybe the demon was too strong to defeat alone, asks Buddha for help. Well, not Buddha himself, but a bodhisattva, Guanyin. Guanyin then disguises herself as a Taoist master whom the bear knew, and Wukong transforms himself into an immortality pill. So they go to talk to the bear, and the bear, thinking it was his friend there, and seeing that they were offering him a pill, takes the pill. Then Wukong starts beating the bear from the inside out, causing terrible pain. He only stops when the bear offers obedience to Guanyin, who puts a headband on the bear's head very similar to Wukong's. The bear repents for his crimes and leaves with Guanyin to an isolated island, where he would serve as the guardian of the forest. In fact, we even see this in the final cutscene with the bear talking to that being. Well, like I said, that's the mandatory boss for the chapter, but if you ring the 3 bells, you end up facing the secret boss, which is Elder Jinchi. Well, you remember I told you that the bear ended up spotting the fire that was happening at the Guanguanin monastery. Well, the guy who caused that fire was Jinchi. Actually, not just him, but several monsters who were after Tang Sanzan's robe. And incredibly, all of this was caused in a way by Wukong himself, who ended up showing the robe to Jinchi. He became obsessed. He couldn't think of anything else. He couldn't sleep. And he decided to set fire to the monastery with Tang Sanzan inside so that he would die, and then he could keep the robe. However, Wukong uses this robe to protect his master, and they end up surviving this fire. And the ones who set fire to the monastery under Jinchi's orders were 2 of his disciples, Kwang Mu and Guanzi, who are also in Chapter 1. But Jinchi didn't expect that the black bear would end up stealing the robe, and when he sees that the robe is gone, he goes crazy and starts banging his head against the wall until, well, he passes away. And this whole story I told you is the final animation of the first chapter, Chapter 1. And when we defeat the Elder Jinchi, we end up getting the robe called Kesaya, which is the robe from this story, and it gives a lot of resistance against fire. Well, in Chapter 2, we go to the Yellow King's mountain range, or Yellow Wind mountain range, where the final boss is the Yellow Wind King. We also have a secret boss in this stage, but he was just created for the game, so it's not really worth talking about here. Anyway, in the Journey to the West, when Sun Wukong's group passes through this mountain range, they end up smelling a terrible odor, which is caused by a minion of the Yellow Wind King, who was the Vanguard Tiger. And that's also in this chapter. It's actually a reference both to the tiger that we end up facing in that temple, the Bloody Tiger Temple, and also when we go to face the Yellow Wind King, where the Vanguard Tiger also appears. Well, using a wind technique, he captures Tang Sanzang and takes him to the Yellow Wind Cave, where the king intends to devour the monk. But he knew about Sun Wukong and Zubagi, got scared of them, and decided to tie Tang Sanzang to a post there, dragging him along. That way, until his 2 disciples got tired of searching, Wukong manages to reach the cave, kills Tiger Vanguard, and then the Yellow Wind King appears, also wearing bronze armor and using a steel technique. He starts fighting Wukong, and they fight for quite a while, until Wukong uses his clones. And the Yellow Wind King uses the Samadhi wind, which darkens both the sky and the earth and blinds Wukong. Wukong then starts thinking of a way to defeat this guy, but he realizes that his blindness isn't going away, so he decides to retreat. Well then, in his search to heal his eyes, Wukong ends up receiving a divine message from Buddha Lingji, who invites Wukong to speak with him. And Wukong goes there then, and Lingji tells Wukong the origin of this monster. And he says that actually the original form of the Yellow Wind King was a little animal called a marten or something like that. I'll ask the editor to put it on the screen for you, this animal here. He lived on Vulture Peak. But one time, he ended up stealing oil from Buddha's altar and ran away. Lingji then, promising to help Wukong, goes with him to face the Yellow Wind King and gives Wukong a pill called the Wind Stabilizing Pill. And with that, Wukong is finally able to defeat the Yellow Wind King, who returns to his original form. And as you know, those of you who have played, Buddha Lingji is also in the game. Well, after we defeat the Yellow Wind King in the game, we go to a stop-motion cutscene that tells the story of the Scholar and the Fox, which is about a guy who ends up saving a fox, who is actually a Yaoguai, right? And when he finds this out, he kills her, and even wears the fox's skin around his neck. Well, this fox, this animation, is a reference to a very famous legend in Japan and China, and also in Korea, which is the legend of the Kitsune, the nine-tailed fox, which in the case of China is called Hori Jin. And there are several stories like this. The guy ends up marrying a woman, then finds out that she was actually a kitsune and ends up killing her, even wearing her skin around his neck, exactly like what happens there in this cutscene. However, an interesting thing in the game is that this story continues in Chapter 3, because there's a side quest there where you find the spirit of a fox that's trapped, and you have to find the guy who did this, and you even end up fighting him later. Well, in Chapter 4, we have the story of Yellowbrow, or Chelha Amarella, who both in Black Myth and also in Journey to the West, wanted to become a Buddha, but without achieving enlightenment. And his story and journey is actually quite interesting because according to the tale, the group of Wukong and Tang San was passing through the region of Chelha Amarella when Tang San saw what looked like a temple, and Kong even noticed that something was wrong. He sensed something demonic in that place. But Tang San insisted on staying there. When they got closer, they saw what seemed to be a smiling Buddha, surrounded by several celestial beings there. And Tang San, thinking that the one there was actually Buddha, even bowed down, but it was actually Yellowbrow. Then he started laughing, and that whole temple, which was supposed to be the new Thunder Temple, began to turn into a dungeon. Yellowbrow's idea was simply to kill Kong, transform into him, and take the scriptures to the West himself, proving he was greater than the heroes. What he did to try to defeat Kong was use some golden treasures, like the golden symbols, which were basically sacred plates. Those symbols wrapped around Kong and put him in an impenetrable darkness that not even his staff could get through. He needed the help of some deities, in this case, the 28 constellations. And one of them, which was the dragon constellation, managed to put its horn between the symbols, and Kong turned into a small drill and went through this horn, getting out of there. But then Yellowbrow ended up revealing his second stolen treasure, which was the Mario cloth bag. We also see it in the game. With that bag, he sucked in the entire celestial army, all the gods, and even Kong's companions into the bag, leaving him isolated once again. And when he was about to give up, the true owner of those artifacts appeared, Maitreya Buddha. And Buddha Maitreya revealed that, in fact, Yellow Eyebrow was his disciple, who had stolen his treasures and fled to the mortal world. But he had a plan to catch him. In this case, Maitreya disguised himself there, or dressed up as a peasant who asked for watermelons, and Kong turned into one of those watermelons. And when Yellow Eyebrow noticed Kong, he stopped to eat a watermelon there, and when he devoured the watermelon, Kong went inside him and started beating him from the inside out, until Yellow Eyebrow ended up begging for mercy and promised that he would follow Maitreya's teachings. Buddha then took on his true form, took both his disciple and his artifacts, and left for his palace. By the way, that reference to the watermelon story explains why Maitreya sometimes appears there eating a watermelon. And the animation that appears to us after we defeat Yellow Eyebrow is the absurd, or innocence, which is about a mythical creature that is found by some villagers and starts making the whole village prosper and helping people. But in her blood, or inside her, there were several treasures. And when the villagers end up discovering this, they start tearing pieces off her to get the treasure. Actually, this is an experiment on Yellow Eyebrow himself, or Guandi Mei, which is his name, to try to prove to Jin Chanzi that he would actually be an incarnation of Tang San himself. that humans are actually evil and only want things for themselves, thus proving that they deserve to be ruled by someone wiser and more powerful than them. In other words, Yellow Eyebrow himself. Well, moving on to Chapter 4 of the game, we focus on Zubagi, the Spider Sisters, and also on the 100-Eyed Taoist. And starting with Zubagi, in this case, the final animation of this chapter shows his story. Zubagi originally served under the Celestial General. However, once he ended up drinking so much at a festival at a banquet that he went crazy and made a move on the moon goddess, who was Tian-ji. He kept bothering her there until the Jade Emperor saw it and thought it was a huge disrespect. He ordered him to be beaten 800 times and then thrown to earth in the form of a pig ogre. Well, he then started devouring people and so on. But one time, he found a village and saw a beautiful woman there. He transformed himself into a handsome guy, managed to win her hand in marriage, and even married her. However, when the woman discovered Zubagi's true form, Zubagi actually, he ended up locking her in a dungeon. Well, when Wukong and Tang San found Zubagi ended up fighting against Wukong. But later it was revealed that, actually, Guan Yin had asked Zubagi to wait for Tang San to arrive, because he would also be part of the journey to the west, and would try to prove himself worthy of redemption. Now, moving on to the second part of the chapter, about who the Spider Sisters are, here's what happens. At a certain point in the story, Tang San had gone out to beg for alms, to ask the people for food, because he was very hungry. Those spiders ended up noticing that Tang San seemed like a delicious feast, and they invited him to their house. Well, the Spider Sisters intended to devour Tang San, but then they decided to take a bath before that. And at that exact moment, Sun Wukong found the place where they were, together with Zubagi. Zubagi, in this case, when he saw that the Spider Sisters were in the form of very beautiful women, didn't really want to help much. He just wanted to stay there swimming with them. However, Wukong, taking advantage of their distraction, went inside and started beating everyone up. He managed to defeat them and save his master. But, continuing the story, they ended up at the Temple of Yellow Flowers, where there was a Taoist master who was actually an ally of the Spider Sisters. This master was called the 100-Eyed Taoist Master, or the Centipede Demon Master. And all over his body he had several eyes that released poison, and also a divine golden light. Of course, this caused a huge problem for Wukong, who also needed Buddha's help to defeat this demonic being who was the Buddha Palampo, who gave him a little needle, which is actually the same needle we end up getting in the game. Using this needle, which was dipped in the eye of the son of Buddha Palampo, who was the lord of the Pleiades, Wukong managed to pierce the demon's magic and make him reveal his true form, which was a giant monster without eyebrows. And then the monster was carried away, captured. And as I told you, right, the final cutscene of this chapter actually tells the story of Zubagi himself. Well, Chapter 5 of the Flaming Mountains is completely focused on the story of Bull King, who is one of Sun Wukong's sworn brothers. As soon as Sun Wukong declared himself the great sage equal to heaven, 6 of his friends, who were also demon kings, also declared themselves great sages. If you want to know who they are, I have a video here on the channel, which will be in the card and in the description for you. But here, talking about Bull King himself, according to the story in Journey to the West, after Wukong ended up being imprisoned under the mountains, Bull King ended up prospering a lot, right? He ended up getting a wife who would be the Princess Ironfan, and he also had a son who was the Red Boy, right? Red Boy, as he's called in Black Myth, and he even had a lover. But the region where Bull King lived, which was a mountain, was exactly the region where, when Wukong broke the celestial furnace and escaped from there, the pieces of that furnace fell right there on King Bull's mountains, setting them on fire. And the only way to put out the fire on that mountain was by using Bull King's wife's fan. And as soon as Wukong arrived in the region of that mountain, he and his friends were attacked by Red Boy, Bull King's son, who had enormous power because he was the heir to the Samadhi fire, the divine fire. And Wukong almost died in that battle, being burned. He needed the help of Bodhisattva Guan Yin to finally defeat Red Boy. Guan Yin took this boy and brought him to her palace, making him her disciple. But Bull King and the princess ended up thinking it was a kidnapping. And when Wukong went to ask the princess for the fan, she even gave him the fan, but it was actually a fake fan that made the flames in the place even stronger. In the same way, Wukong went to talk to his former sworn brother, who was actually very angry with Wukong because of his son, right? And the two ended up fighting. This battle grew to such gigantic proportions, so gigantic, that the Celestial Palace had to intervene, because Wukong and the Bull King both took on their giant forms, right? And from up above came down Li Jin, who was Neza's father, and Neza himself. And the two managed to capture the Bull King, who ended up declaring himself a Buddhist, and told his wife, right, to hand over the fan to Wukong. By the way, this whole story I told you is the story of the final cutscene of Chapter 5, where Neza also appears, Li Jin shows up, there's the battle against the Bull King and everything else. Well, in Chapter 6, the final boss is Wukong himself, corrupted. But those who played know that. To see the true ending, actually, we have to face that bastard Erlang Shen before we go fight the final boss, so we can see the true ending. And in this fight against Erlang Shen, we also end up facing the 4 heavenly kings. They protect the 4 corners of the sky, being Dhritarashtra, Virudaka, Virupaksha, and Vaishravana. Well, after we defeat Erlang Shen, we also get Wukong's memories, right? And after we defeat the corrupted form of Wukong, we also see an animated cutscene, which really resembles the anime style that recaps the most famous arcs from the classic Journey to the West book. We see, for example, Wukong's golden headband being removed. Right at the beginning, Wukong ends up finishing the original journey and is named the Victorious Fighting Buddha. Instead of accepting eternal submission to the celestial court, the animation shows him tearing the golden headband off his own head, symbolizing his quest for total freedom before the events at the start of the game. The quick sequence of images also shows some direct references to the most iconic chapters of the novel, such as the Tungal River, for example. Tiang, which would be the giant turtle appearing there, where a giant turtle throws the monk Tang Senzang and his disciples into the water because they forgot to ask the gods a question on her behalf. There's the drought of Feng Tiang, where there's a chicken eating a mountain of rice and a dog licking a mountain of flour next to a padlock tied by a string. This is the punishment the Jade Emperor gave Feng Tiang after its ruler offended the gods. There's also the cage with babies, which shows babies trapped there under the command of a disguised demon who would be the servant of the god of longevity and who would harvest the children's hearts. There's the rock bird, there's the real monkey versus the fake monkey, right? Which would be the 6-eared monkey there who's trying to imitate Wukong. There's the blue bull, the diamond ring, the pain of the mantra, the Gizan fruit tree, the river of floating sands, and many, many other things. But the most interesting thing of all is that it suggests in this animation that everything that happened in the game, even Wukong's own death, was part of Sun Wukong's own plan to completely free himself from his connection to the gods.